Okay, so welcome to the webinar on becoming a thought leader while furloughed. We've all got, or many of us have got, some unexpected free time on our hands. This webinar will be helping you use that productively, whether you are properly furloughed and are on paid leave from your employer, or we've had huge interest in this webinar. Probably more people have registered for this webinar than any other we've had. It's up there certainly as one of the most popular ones we've ever done. And a lot of people are, shall we say, involuntary unpaid furlough, where they're self-employed people, consultants, small businesses, where the work's dried up, but they don't qualify for any of the government assistance. So if you're in that category, welcome as well, commiserations, and hopefully this is going to be a very useful session for you. So in terms of just a few housekeeping points, we'll probably be running about 45 minutes. We are going to take questions as we go along and also at the end, so do fire them along. Some people here are on proper paid government furlough. One thing I want to give a health warning to is not to break that furlough. You aren't allowed to do work for your employer, including free work for your employer as part of that package. How they will monitor it, I do not know, but certainly you are allowed to undertake training such as this, so you're very able to be here, and clearly you will be able to write things, post things, things like that. But I wouldn't do anything that involves contacting colleagues who are working on something that is too directly salesy or related to something that your employer will be able to directly use. So if you're on paid furlough and you're worried about sailing close to the wind, my advice would be, one, don't sail close to the wind, do something else which you're more than able to do that doesn't sail close to the wind. Do check HMRC guidelines. If you're listening to the recorded version, please do send me your questions through again, but email through to me and I'll answer them by reply. Okay, so quick overview of what we will be covering. I've done various thought leadership presentations, and many of the people on this will have actually attended to those. And my initial thought was, oh, well, I can just repurpose one of my existing presentations and that won't take very long. And that plan came to nothing, and I've largely rewritten it. So if you have done been on these presentations before, hopefully if this is very specifically aimed at people at home with limited resources. If you are still employed and looking to do this for your business, you're very welcome to join here. Some of the tips will be useful, but really we've got a recorded webinar on this. Drop me an email, I'll send you the link to that, and that will be much more useful if you're thinking about thought leadership for your business, whether on a large scale or on a limited budget. We'll be looking at the different approaches that you at home can take. I think a very important thing is looking at the list of people who've joined this webinar, and many of you I've known for quite considerable periods of time, and I know just how expert you are in your subjects. If you've not been doing this for a while already, it isn't because you know your stuff, it's other things there. And so really I wanted to spend a bit of time getting you started, getting you staying on track, and tackling those fears which may well have held you back so far. And thank you to all the people who completed the pre-questionnaire, the biggest area that people requested was how to use LinkedIn to maximize impact. I may well actually do a follow-up video on that, but we will be tackling a few key points on that as we go along. But as I say, do fire your questions in as we go. For those people who don't know me, my name is Tim Priceman. Very nice to meet you. There is my LinkedIn address if you want to connect up afterwards. I've been advising B2B tech, financial, professional firms on PR, thought leadership, and social media and all sorts of things for well over 20 years, initially in-house, but as a director at Kelso Consulting for well over 20 years. Thought leadership is something I've been involved with since the before the term was used, and I have a book on it. It's a fabulous read, and even in these times, you can get your hands on it from Amazon, or if you hate Amazon, from Wordery, delivered to your door and in ebook form. It's a fabulous read and a great present for friends and loved ones. And many of the things I'll be covering here are tackled in that book, albeit that book is aimed more at people doing it in business mode than people doing it from home. Okay, well, there's a few bits about Kelso Consulting and what my business does. Give me a call if you want to discuss any of those. So I think it was worth having an overview of thought leadership because it's such a big and overblown term. I think it actually puts people off and causes many people to set their sights too high. There's nothing wrong with having your sights high, but if you set them so high that you think you'll never attain it, it's a big problem. So I want to go through it a bit because it can mean lots of different things and many of them are very accessible for you at home. Now, I think we're all familiar with what thought leadership can mean at a big scale. It's doing some blockbuster research, getting some great insights out there, wheeling in the marketing team, the PR team, the sales team, if you have one, and doing a big campaign. So that certainly is it. But we're not talking about that today. Thought leadership can be all sorts of things, and indeed, it could be things like just doing some thought-provoking blogs, articles, maybe a video. It could be writing a book or a report or an ebook. You could analyse some data and come up with some interesting findings, spot some trends. Maybe it's thought-provoking observations backed by evidence. Some businesses, the individuals, do freedom of information requests. I'm not sure they'll be turned around very quickly at the moment, but people do use those sorts of things. And it's all about, it could well be simply making unexpected or interesting comparisons and connections with different topics, areas, geographies. And indeed, I think the way to look on thought leadership really in the context, I'll be using that term because it's the one that is used more widespread, but it could be thinking of yourself as an expert commentator. And I think it very much should be seen as seeing yourself as a thought provoker. So when I say thought leadership, if the term expert or go-to person or thought provoker works better for you, absolutely use those ones. And maybe those terms are closer to what we're talking about today. But what thought leadership, I just want to emphasize, isn't. It's corporates bunging out press releases and newsletters willy-nilly about wonderful announcements and stupendous upgrades and that sort of thing. It certainly isn't the low quality SEO cut and paste clickbait articles that content agencies provide people that Google loves and humans hate. It isn't technical output that few understand. I'm not saying there isn't space for you to do technical output that few understand. In fact, it may well be reassuring to some of your clients that you are able to do this. But what we're not talking about that today. Maybe we're talking, if you do that sort of thing, it's how to reuse that technical output to reach a larger audience. It certainly isn't anything that's thinly my sales pitch. It's definitely not Me Too opinions or indeed avoiding expressing an opinion. That doesn't mean you want to get your blog out there and start telling everyone they're idiots and they're wrong, but it is about expressing an opinion. And where many firms go wrong, don't fall into this trap, is simply seeing thought leadership as punching out lots of data and then they never interpret it, they never get insight, and then they wonder why it doesn't get much coverage. Again, data without insight. Thought leadership, thought provoking is all about the insight from the data, not the data itself. So where does that leave us? Well, in terms of strategies that might work for you, clearly there's the corporate approach of creating your own IP, your insights with maybe with some blockbuster research or a clever bit of analysis, or you've got a really whizzy model that people can use to help understand things. These are all great. But I'm assuming people here don't have the resources at home for this sort of thing. If you are one of the few people that does, brilliant. But most people here, in fact, I think all people on this call have a strong knowledge of at least one specific area and often several areas. And indeed, many people on here also have a strong overview of quite a number of things. And so how would you deploy that in the quest to raise your profile as a bit of an expert, a go-to person in a particular area? Well, the path a lot of people go down immediately, particularly if they're in sort of techie areas or often marketing, even PR areas, is to double down on their expertise. So the expert web designer starts punting out lots of top tips on how to optimize your website or get the best out of a particular upgrade or troubleshoot some problem from Microsoft, or the marketing person or the PR person spends a lot of time writing how to get the maximum impact from your press releases, things like that. Now, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing those sorts of things, but ultimately they drive you into a number of traps that will mean you don't want to do it very often. The first trap is you're giving all away your expertise for nothing. Secondly, all it's doing is painting you into a narrower corner as an artisan rather than a person with broad knowledge or valuable expert knowledge. Rather, you are just becoming more and more a technical artisan. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do those sorts of areas, and if it's a really high value area where you will nonetheless be called in, such as, a particular area of tax expertise or things like that, then there's nothing wrong with it. But beware that the more you double down on it, in a way, the more you undermine your position as the thought leader. So there's a number of other ones which I think very much apply to people on this webinar. I haven't come up with some catchy names for them. I've come up with some poor names for them, but bear with me on those. I'll think about them a bit more and make them catchier. And they're the commentator, the radar, the aggregator, the connector, and the Wimbledon approach. So what would these ones be? So with the commentator, clearly it's using your knowledge to provide informed comment as an industry expert on something. And this could be breaking developments, it could be new laws, it could be this, that, and the other, but it's to give some sort of comment that adds value. So rather than explaining the rules, you might be talking a bit about the problems, or why it's a missed opportunity, or the opportunities it opens up, or will people welcome it, or those sorts of things. So it's very much a pundit type role. So you're there using your knowledge to provide an informed comment, not so much on the technical detail, but say the problems, opportunities, challenges, that sort of thing arising. An alternative strategy is the radar strategy, where you scan perhaps for interest in research, interest in developments, and you share it. So this way you're acting, people start to value you because you are providing them with interesting and relevant things. And indeed, the fact that you're going through this process makes you more knowledgeable and expert. And indeed, you get the halo effect that if you're sharing lots of leading stuff, people start to associate you with it. If you share interesting stuff from the Harvard Business Review, it very much creates a different impression of you if you share cat pictures and interesting stories from the Sun newspaper. The aggregator is something that many people do. You are effectively perhaps doing a weekly update of interesting developments, interesting news. Clearly, the whole purpose here is that you're the person, you first of all, you've got to do it regularly, whereas maybe with a radar, you are just doing it ad hoc when there's something interesting, albeit you have to do it with a regularity to it. So with the aggregator, come what may, you're doing a 5 interesting things in sector X or issue Y or COVID updates or whatever it is. With the connector one, and I'm not talking about connecting people, I'm talking about connecting 2 different subjects. So an example of this would be, say you want to be seen as an expert on COVID-19 and its business impact. So a connector would do things like COVID-19, 100 years ago, there was the Spanish flu. What can we learn from Spanish flu? So it's made a connection to something that people don't particularly know about or didn't until recently, and makes the connections to it. Or the connection might be a geographic one, which would be, we're doing this in Britain, what can we learn from Mongolia? Or what can we learn from South America? Or what can we learn from the Germans? So it's a geographic connection. The third one could do is a sector one. You want to be seen as an expert on COVID-19's impact in your sector, and you might say, so say your sector is professional services, so it would be COVID-19, what can professional services learn from the retail sector? What can it learn from transport sector or whatever? So again, you're making a connection with something else. Clearly you've got to know that sector or research that sector, but you are bringing new knowledge and insights through a connection with something else. Okay, and finally, the Wimbledon strategy. And if you don't fancy any of those, or you're feeling worried, or that you don't have enough knowledge about the subject, then the Wimbledon strategy is the perfect one for you. So Wimbledon tennis competition, in the days before Andy Murray, and probably the days after Andy Murray, Britain hosted the world's greatest grass tennis tournament and never won it. Indeed, it had, for decades, we had no one who even looked like they'd remotely come close to winning it. Yet we hosted the competition. So this is very much, you host the competition without necessarily getting too deep in it. This might be you interview people, you write case studies from other people. And in fact, this is a fabulous, this approach has made all sorts of business gurus famous through them case studying businesses that's been successful and drawing out a few lessons and then going off and ranting about this on the conference circuit and lots of books. But it could just be you writing up case studies of interesting things. It could be doing a podcast where you interview someone else on a particular topic. It could be hosting online discussions. So again, you're not necessarily getting involved too deeply with it. In fact, you're quite frankly, maybe it could be cynically said, you are piggybacking on the expertise of other people. But ultimately, it's rubbing off from you, both in terms of the halo effect that you're associated with these sorts of things. But secondly, it's all about building up your knowledge in this sector as well. So there are a range of strategies here, and having looked at the people who are on this webinar, there is absolutely no excuse for any one of you not being able to pursue at least one of these, and probably take your pick of all of them, but not do the technical one. Okay, so ultimately, for you, thought leadership could be commenting with an interesting perspective on other people's posts on LinkedIn. But I think you should be aiming higher than that. It could be fast comments in your sector. It could be creating an ebook, or at least do a long article and a white paper. And if that goes well, do a second, a third, a fourth, put them all together, create an ebook. It could be writing an article in a magazine or sending a letter to the editor. It can be interviewing experts, leaders, past clients, or it could simply be doing a weekly or fortnightly informed blog on LinkedIn. So, how do you get started? Well, clearly, memorability is all about having something interesting to say. But at the same time, the people who are the most memorable are people who do it time after time and get good at it. And the more you do it, the more interesting and more memorable the things you have to say are. Do not worry if your first blog post only gets 2 likes and 1 share and very little traffic. That isn't the purpose of the first blog post. The purpose of the first blog post is to get going and move on to the second and move on to the third and move on to the fourth, and learn from each time about what's working and what isn't, so that over a period of time you have a bigger following because of the consistency and the relevance to it, and indeed the continuous improvement. Now, a lot of people say to me, I'm too busy for this, or I'm too busy at the moment, I will do it. Now, clearly that excuse at the moment is complete rubbish, but actually it's always been complete rubbish. On an individual day, people may be too busy, but actually it's just a matter of priorities. In fact, when it comes to PR and generating press coverage, the busiest people have been the best at it simply because they've prioritized it, whereas people who deprioritize it don't get much coverage. They're all as busy as each other. I've never met a consultant, accountant or lawyer, or indeed marketing person who says they are not busy. Well, not up until March 2020 anyway. So if you are saying you're too busy or it takes up too much time, you've got to be aware this is not the case. It is simply a matter of prioritization, and for whatever reason, probably not a good one, you are prioritizing something else. Indeed, what I find for a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about the subject, is actually it's their inner fears that are stopping them doing it. Often people say to me, what if I get it wrong? I can honestly say you will not get it wrong, because the sorts of things you are putting out there are not the sort of things where it's a right or wrong answer. It's a question of adding information, adding insight, adding perspective. Clearly, if you go out there and say, oh, my prediction is on 20th of July, the government will organise another lockdown, but nobody is in that sort of perspective. It's all about sharing information and adding an insight onto it. Some people say, shock horror, people will disagree with me. Well, if you are such a delicate flower that you can't handle that, I do not believe you're probably even on this webinar, but some people have said this to me. Good. The whole point is there will be some people who disagree with you. If no one ever disagrees with you, your points of view are too timorous, okay? But it doesn't happen actually that much, and it's more about the people who agree with you, not the people who disagree. But again, got to get this in perspective. LinkedIn, it's not a platform for trolling. If it was on social media like Twitter or something, it might be a different view if you suddenly start talking about something on Me Too or a politically correct topic like that. But it's not. It's LinkedIn. It's a sensible platform. People agree with you, disagree with you, ignore you, endorse you, whatever. It's not a problem, and everyone survives, and indeed their reputation grows regardless of whichever outcome from this. Other people might know it more than me. Great, yes. Well, we're all in that boat. Even the world's most knowledgeable people have that. And I might expose a lack of knowledge. I do not think so. But if you will be coming on for strategies if you feel that. But the reality is, this is you've got imposter syndrome if you are thinking that. I haven't got enough time to tackle imposter syndrome, but there's tons of stuff online about it. Again, if you get writer's block, again, actually using that as an excuse isn't an excuse. It's other things there causing that block, particularly on these sorts of things. So I can't tackle imposter syndrome, but if you've got all of these sorts of excuses, you've got it, acknowledge it, look it up, but reassured that whatever fears are holding you back, they are not realistic ones. Oh, and by the way, the one I often hear is I only want to do it when I have something interesting to say. I can honestly say, looking at the people who've registered, you have something interesting to say. Do not worry about that. And it's if it's not interested to certain people, it will be interesting to other people. So just get on and say it. Okay, now getting the subject right. Now, this is one of my reused corporate-y slides, and I think it's still useful in this context because when people are in corporates and they're in marketing and sales mode, the big problem is that they focus on what's the top end of the funnel in marketing terms. So they are focusing on people who have pretty much made up their mind they want to buy something. They are perhaps researching. They know what solution they want. They're looking at providers. They're doing a proposal. They're looking at the technical specification. So most businesses put a lot of emphasis, probably too much emphasis, into very sales orientated material. But the problem is the only people who are interested in that sort of stuff are people who are actively in buy-in mode. And as we know, the more senior people are, the less they are in buy-in mode. And if you try to sell them when they're not in buy-in mode, they rebuff you. But by the time they go into sales mode, or buy-in mode rather, they've already largely decided who they want to use. So how do you get into that? How do you break that catch-22 to develop the relationship before they go into buy-in mode so that you can be at least on the short list and hopefully lead in it? Well, that's where corporates use thought leadership to engage at a much earlier stage. While you're not engaging in the sales process at the moment, that's exactly the sorts of areas you should be thinking about. It's where there's latent needs or opportunity or problem. It's at much more the strategic and informational level. The more you go down to, something very technical or very sales orientated, really, first of all, you've lost that thought leadership position. You're already in sales mode, but you're putting off and deterring all the people you actually want to reach, except for the small number who are in sales mode, but you won't reach them anyway. What you need to be doing is developing a relationship to move people or be top of into sales mode later date, or to be front of mind for when they do. So where do you start getting some good topics for you to start to talk about? Well, a good place is common problems you encounter at your clients. Again, not too technical, but it's a good area to start with. And if your first blog is a technical one, not to worry. I think the main thing is not to keep ploughing that furrow, but to move out of it with broader topics as you become more confident. You should certainly be looking at industry comments. Do brainstorm with colleagues, or better still, people who aren't colleagues, because if it is colleagues, you might end up with groupthink. In fact, you invariably will. And a really good thing is to start thinking about laws, major industry events, regulations, but particularly mega trends. Now, this is a chart I did quite a while ago looking at what constitutes a mega trend. Well, these are the sorts of things that move really slowly but have a very profound impact. Many of them are driven by technology, but they change the world around us. They change the way we work, the way we live, the way society operates. And the advantage with a mega trend is that it's relevant now. It is relevant in 2.5 years' time. So the more you can associate yourself with a mega trend, the longer a shelf life, the effort you're doing to be seen as a thought leader pays off. Okay. So megatrends are good ones. The problem with megatrends, though, is that they're not necessarily very topical, and it gets a bit blue sky, and people really don't really engage with blue sky thought leadership. We can all write an article about what life will be like in 30 years' time when we've got chips implanted in our skulls, but it's not really very useful and people don't engage with it. So what you need to do is balance it with a couple of other areas. Have a mega trend, reference a mega trend, that sort of thing, but at the same time you've got to give it a topicality at the moment. And if you're targeting a particular industry, it needs to be specific to that, or a particular profession, it needs to be specific to that. And the ideal position of thought leadership, as the diagram shows, is where the three intersect. So for instance, if I had set myself up as a expert on artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence is a mega trend, and maybe I was interested in targeting the the retail sector, and I wanted to be topical, I'd do an article on how AI can help the retail sector during the COVID crisis, or recover from the COVID crisis, or keep its online websites from crashing, or stop its stores running out, or something like that, because it combines the mega trend, the topicality, and it's highly relevant to those sorts of people. And the more you get familiar with doing this sort of thing, the more you'll be able to spot those sorts of ones. Indeed, it's a perfect area to do a brainstorm with a few people for your area. And you can do the brainstorm online. We don't have to get into a meeting. Megatrends, topical and specific to the people you're looking for. But particularly as it's you doing it, the best subjects are ones that you will be personally interested in. If you're going to be spending 7 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, 20 minutes for that matter, researching a subject, if you're interested in it, you're going to do it. If you're not really interested in it, we're going to go back to the problem I mentioned, that it just gets deprioritized. You can't delegate it to anyone else because it's you. The more it relates to your professional area and your area, quite frankly, your comfort zone, that's important. But particularly for your professional area, ultimately, it's no point me making myself an expert on COVID-19, because quite frankly, that's really not going to help me as a communications professional. In the same way, perhaps becoming an expert on artificial intelligence and writing lots of articles about those isn't going to help me. The same for you. It'd be great, you might know lots about castles or something like that. Yeah, great, set yourself up as a thought leader in those areas. But if you're it's probably not really going to help you very much unless you're the English heritage is your target zone. And clearly, it must be important to the people you want to influence. That could be important because it's of interest to them now, or you feel it will become important to them and you want to get ahead of the curve. Now, coming up with ideas, particularly by yourself, is particularly hard. Do look up ways of coming up with ideas using creativity. But if you need some ideas fast, there's a link to the HubSpot blog topic generator, but it's actually quite good for coming up with all sorts of things. Basically, you go on that link, which I'll send through in a subsequent email as well, put in a couple of nouns relevant to what you want to talk about, and it comes up with lots of ideas. Of every 5, perhaps 2 or 3 aren't much cop, 1 or 2, sometimes 3 out of 5 are really good. Or inspire something else from you. So if you want to write a blog, not sure what to do it's about, give it a go. But the key thing is, and this is an action for after this webinar, is to set your goals today. Don't just say, oh, that was an interesting webinar, now I'll get back to mowing the grass and watching the Marvel on Disney+. You need to start today by creating some goals that are going to motivate you. Now, I would suggest start with a couple of small goals that you can implement next week, and then think more about the bigger picture for you. I think it's more important to get going and create momentum than it is to disappear for 3 weeks, come back with a huge, great plan, and then not implement it. Now, first of all, you need to do goals that will motivate you. Now, this can be a very simple one, but do make it smart, which, as you know, is specific, something you can do, and put a time on it. Now, the key thing, though, is you need to write it down. Don't just write it down, stick it in an email and forget about it. Print it out, or better still, write it down the good old-fashioned way. Maybe just put it on a post-it note, put it where you can see it, whether this is where by your alarm clock, by your coffee machine, by your screen. But then it's not just great having a goal. You need a short action plan and then the willingness to stick to it. So a very short example would be, maybe you want to do a weekly 400-word blog on your topic, and post it on LinkedIn. So your plan would be to each week, starting tomorrow, look at trending articles on that subject. You might then say, okay, I will spend Monday afternoon, I'll block it in my diary, researching that subject. I'm going to write it on Wednesday. I'm going to put in an hour and a half to write it, or 2 hours, or however long you think it's going to take you. I'm going to get my partner or someone else to proofread it, and I'm going to post it on Thursday at 9 a.m. And then I'm going to do it again. So that would be a very simple way just to get going, just to start getting into the cycle of posting interesting articles. Is it going to be the world's greatest article? Well, it might be, but it's not going to be the world's worst. It's not going to be your worst, and it's going to be really good. So get on and do it. And your partner will tell you if it's not. And if you don't trust your partner's judgment, send it to me and I will tell you, as I'm pretty good at critiquing articles, whether I know anything about the subject or not. Okay, so I'm not going to labour this point too much, but the importance of what you should just remember with the article is WSIGAF, which isn't very memorable, but it stands for why should I give a fig, or words to that effect. So when you've written your article and had a bit of a think, put it to one side, come back to it, and just think, if someone was to turn around to me, one of my target ones, and say, yeah, read your article, but why should I give a that? What is your answer to that? Is there a good answer? Is it obvious from your article why they should give a fig, in which case it's a good article? If you are not clear that you can answer that, if someone were to say it to you, then have a bit more of a thought about drawing out what is the key point from it. This is a test I invariably use on our PR, as journalists do say to you this sort of thing. So it's not a problem, and I'm sure everyone on this webinar is more than capable of dealing with a client if they were to say that after you told them something very interesting, such as the stuff in your article. So we want to make it memorable. And the key thing is just to, don't make it all academic. Remember, if you look at a newspaper article, whether it's the Times or the FT as much as the tabloids, they're written with short paragraphs, memorable phrases. They bring things to life with data points, stories, analogies, public domain examples. It's not theoretical. It's not written like an academic diploma. So there's lots of things that you can do to make it an interesting article without feeling you have to be the world's greatest copywriter. Ultimately, if your writing is awful, what I would suggest is find someone who you trust who will give it a quick work over. That's not a problem. I'm sure there is someone within your social circle who will do that. Alternatively, and this is how I did my book, I simply dictated it. In those days, you had to pay someone to dictate it. Nowadays, there's, on the whole, and if you do it clearly and slowly, there's software that's up to, well, most of the job on a good day. So dictating things often works very well. Now, sharing your insights is something I just want to spend a few moments on, because ultimately doing a brilliant article and then no one reads it is not going to help you build your reputation. Now, certainly you can email it to colleagues, but clearly there's a big beware if you are on paid further about that. Sharing this on LinkedIn, I'm going to cover in a minute. You may well belong to groups which have their own newsletter. You can certainly get it in there. You can just send it to people you want to influence, whether via LinkedIn or ringing up, getting their email and sending it to them, or maybe atting them via social media or whatever. With press coverage, I've got some existing webinars on how to get press coverage, so I'm not going to go into it too much, other than to say if you want to write an article for a publication, in theory it's very straightforward. You look at the publication, you Google who is the features editor for it, you email your idea to them, not the article, your idea, and then you hound them until they say yes or say no. They will say yes if it's a good fit for the publication. You make sure it's a good fit for the publication by reading the other articles on it and thinking about who reads it. There's also, and what is the most underused tactic in PR, which is doing a letter to the editor. You'll be familiar with these on things like the Times, the FT. So I'm not talking about all the random trolling comments at the end of articles. I'm talking about the formal letters to the editor section. The key thing here is send it immediately. You read the article. If you read an article that was in the Times 3 weeks ago, they're not going to be interested in writing in an article, in a letter from you referring to it. You've got to do it the next day, preferably in the morning. Okay, so LinkedIn probably is, for many people here, your most powerful tool for reaching the people you want to reach. And here are a few tips. As mentioned, I'm probably going to do a video on this and other bits and share it, but there's some that I think are worth doing. So first of all, if you were to go to your home page where your face shows up, and you'll see at the top there is search. Now, if you were to put in there the subject you want to be an expert on, so for, in this case, maybe you want to be an expert in something digital, you will put in #digital, and it will start to give you lots of options. Now, these are hashtags that people use within articles, within and groups and things like this in LinkedIn. And what it will do once you hit a return is take you to a page, in this case #digital, and you can follow that, and then in your notifications at the top right, it will notify you on all these sorts, all the articles being written on these subjects. So first of all, that allows you to keep up to date with it, and secondly, it provides an opportunity both to comment on existing articles, but also perhaps see who's interested in their space, follow them, comment, perhaps even link up with them. A couple of bewares. First of all, some of these terms are really very niche, and you can sign up to them, and then there's one post every 4 months on it, so they're a bit of a waste of time. Typically, the broader the category, the more people. So digital has 250,000 followers, whereas this one here, digitalization, probably, yeah, maybe popular in Germany, don't know, but probably not many people in the UK following it. Digital agency, probably not many people, except people trying to promote themselves. One word on the comments, and it's worth looking through to see what works and what doesn't. But if you do look through, a lot of them are either obsequious toadying comments or bland product, we are wonderful ones. You'll see a lot of them. Do not be fooled into thinking that just because there's a lot of them, you should be doing that. Take the opposite view, that there's a lot of dross there, and by being different to them, people will be interested in what you've got to say, because it is in stark contrast to the comments like this one down here. Well, also at the top of that is this thing here, which I'm sure pretty much everyone is familiar with, where you can do a post. You can attach a picture to it, you can upload a video to it, and you can even attach documents to it. The key thing is to have an image. Posts with images get far more engagement. Posts with boring corporate stock shot images get little engagement. Posts with interesting photos, or indeed a photo of yourself, will get far more engagement. I run various images to see which ones work the best. The one that worked for me the best, got far more engagements than anything else, and not just with random people, but with all sorts of good quality people around the world, was a picture of Meghan and Prince Harry. Another image that got a lot of engagement is a very pretty shot of a very beautiful valley near here in the Oxford countryside. And someone I know very well, he produces lots of great management content and bemoans that when he sticks a picture of one of his dogs on LinkedIn, he gets far more engagement from the dog photo than his. So do think about the image, and don't, again, lots of people put up lots of boring corporate stock shots. Don't be like them. Think of something else. Secondly, it's the first bit, as you'll see from this one here, that gets seen is the first line of it. So make it punchy, because that's the bit people will read when they're deciding whether to do it or not. The next bit is, I mentioned earlier about the hash symbols. Do put some relevant ones of those in. Again, make them broad rather than ultra specific if you want to get interest from people. What's the right number on them? I don't know, quite frankly, but I would suggest don't do more than 3 or 4. If you put dozens, it does look very needy in there, and just 1 or 2 probably is, you could probably go a bit more. I think the main thing to do is put them at the bottom if you're going to put in lots, so they don't interrupt the flow of the text. Another tip is, once you've posted it, put a comment into it, maybe a bit of information. What you can also do is, if you've got people you know who you'd like to comment on it, at them in. So if you wanted me to comment on it, you would put, hey, this topic will be really of interest to you, at Tim Prizeman, at Joe Blogs, at whatever. What do you think? Have you ever encountered it? And that will alert LinkedIn. They will come in and add a comment themselves. And that sort of thing is very important, because if you get a number of comments and interactions in a short space of time, LinkedIn will, its algorithm will think, oh, this is getting a lot of interest, will give it even more prominence. And so that's the way you get your snowballing effect. So first of all, you want to use that to get people commenting and liking and sharing. And also you can take the link of the article, which would be at the top right of it, by clicking, and you can share it whether via LinkedIn, InMail, or via email to friends and colleagues or other people, and ask them to like and share it as well. And if you can get, I won't go into the details of its scoring algorithm, but basically if you can get several comments at once besides a few likes, you want comments, that's great. And whenever someone comments, you make sure you like their comment, and also maybe add another comment of it, and this keeps the snowball rolling for your prominence. Okay, you're worried about it going to be weak thought leadership. It's not going to be weak thought leadership, particularly if you've invested a bit of time up front getting it right. It's going to be of interest if you make sure that there is some sort of clear point of view within it. The more strategic, the better, but there just needs to be a bit of a point of view within it, as well as just sharing lots of information. Do get a peer review. top scientists, top consultants, top everybody get their works peer reviewed. Now, this doesn't have to be a long process. It can be asking a couple of people you know and trust to give it a view. This could be your initial hypothesis. I'm thinking of writing on this subject because I think X and Y is going to happen. Do you think that would be of interest? Share your findings and conclusions. Perhaps build in a bit of time if they come back and pour cold water on it. But at the same time, be careful with what people come back with. There's always people out there looking to subvert your agenda and get not do it themselves and get you to do their agenda instead. And there's also lots of people who'll just project their own fears onto you. So you've got to only share it with people you think will be normally supportive of you. If you think someone's a bit, don't share it with them, because all they'll do is just give you extra negativity. Only share with supportive people. Take it in stages. It's particularly important when you're doing it by yourself. Definitely don't give up. Get going, keep going. The first couple of times will be the worst ones. And always remember, the weakest thought leadership is the activity you didn't undertake. And I hope the one thing you will leave this webinar with is the idea that you are going to say, screw it, I'm just going to do it. Okay, can I invite questions? Just to let you know, while people are sending those through, there's lots of ways I can help by you while you're sitting at home. Very happy to. We'll do it without sending through an invoice, unless, of course, you're doing it for your business and it's still business as usual for your business, in which case, clearly, I'd be very happy to do an invoice for it. But if you have a draft of your blog or your white paper, you want someone to look at it, you want to discuss ideas, give me a call. If you want someone to bounce ideas against, give me a call. I do wonder whether we should set up a LinkedIn self-help group for people who've done this webinar, so that people who are going through this, building themselves up at the moment, are able to use each other for reviewing articles, bouncing ideas, mutual support, that sort of thing. If you think that's a good idea, drop me an email, and if I get enough of you, then I'll ping through an invite. I'll set such a group up and we can use that. If you're doing comments or posting stuff, I'd love to read them. Do include at Tim Prizeman on it, and I'll like and share it. And for some of the areas we discussed, such as getting national media coverage, writing blogs, things like this, we have free resources on the Kelso website at that address, and I'll send that through in the subsequent email as well. Okay. We have just time, slightly overrun on time, so apologies. We have just time for one or two questions. Okay, thank you very much for this question. Can you quickly mention the at Tim Prizeman posting together with asking for Tim's thoughts? What is the benefit? Okay, so the benefit for that is a number of things. First of all, if you do a comment on one of your own posts, as I understand it, that LinkedIn likes that, so that counts towards your score. in its algorithm of whether to promote you or not. Secondly, if you @Tim Prizeman in it, I'll get an alert which will take me through to your post, which I might not otherwise see, and I'll see something inviting me to comment on it. And if I'm a reasonably decent person, I will add the comment and hopefully say something interesting as well. The other benefit to it is if you, no one really likes being the first person to comment on things, whereas once you get a few comments, everyone starts to wade in on it. And so that means it's seen by more people, and LinkedIn then promotes it to more people. And also it positions you better as the sort of person with a big network full of buzzy ideas and lots of contacts and things like that. So again, it rubs off on you. So there are numerous benefits to do it. And yes, you can be the first person to add a comment on your own article, but don't add a comment saying, wonderful article. Add a comment saying such as, oh, by the way, here, an extra bit you might find interesting is X. What do you think on it, Tim Prizeman? Don't you have lots of experience in this area? Or what do you expect? You know, your friend Joe Bloggs is often on this. And clearly, if you do that at whoever to people who have big networks, then you get an even bigger impact. So if you someone who's a regular commentator. Now, the question here is, if you never comment or like or share other people's stuff on LinkedIn, then they have very little inclination to share yours. So it's a give as you get world on LinkedIn. So if you're going to go around asking people to like and share, make sure a few days before, if you've not done it already, you like and share their stuff, because they will be much more inclined to reciprocate. So don't just pile in thinking it's all about what it does for me. The whole point of social media and LinkedIn is that it's all about give as you get. And if you've not given anything before, you've no right to expect that you will get anything. How do you avoid confusing others if you have more than one area of expertise? I think you should tell them you're a polymath, is my answer to that question. I do not think it's confusing to anyone that people have more than one area of expertise. I think it might be a bit of a positioning, more of a positioning issue if you think. So, for instance, if your one area of expertise is completely different to another, that how do you present yourself? Do you present yourself as an expert in both of them simultaneously, or one at one time, one or the other? But I don't think per se it is particularly confusing that that people are experts in more than one thing. If you're a professional in two very distinct areas, you are a motor racing car driver and an accountant, I guess people might, it's much a talking point as anything else. So I'd be happy to talk about that more specifically, but I don't think it's a big problem, and it's quite normal in these days for people to have a portfolio area of expertise. Okay, I think that is everything. This is all we have time for at the moment on this subject. But as mentioned, I hope you will not just forget the webinar and then come back and think, oh, I wish I'd done some thought leadership when I had the opportunity in a few months' time. You will write down your goal for next week, how you're going to do it, put it on a post-it note, in big letters say, screw it, just do it, and I look forward to seeing your first, whether it's your blogs or your plans or whatever you want to share with me over the coming days. Good luck, and look forward to hearing from you. Bye for now.